The morning of February 1st, 2008, a panel of New York State appellate judges did something they rarely do. They reversed a lower court. They declared a woman who had been missing for nearly 7 years to be the 2,751st victim of the September 11th terrorist attacks. Her remains had never been found. There was no direct evidence she had ever set foot inside the World Trade Center that morning. But by a vote of 4-1, the court ruled that the most likely explanation for her vanishing was that she had run toward the burning towers to help, and never came back. Her name was Dr. Sneha Anne Philip. She was 31 years old. She lived 4 blocks from the Twin Towers. And to this day, no one can say with certainty what happened to her between the hours of 7 o'clock on the evening of September 10th, 2001, and the moment American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower at 8:46 the next morning. She vanished into a window of time so small and so absolute that the world itself rearranged around her absence. The investigation that should have followed her disappearance never truly began, because by the time anyone realized she was gone, Lower Manhattan was no longer a place where missing persons reports could be processed. It was a crime scene the size of a city. This is the story of a woman whose entire life ended in the gap between one tragedy that swallowed her and another that may have come for her first. This is the case of Sneha Anne Philip, the doctor who disappeared the night before 9/11. Before we go any further with this one, I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments below. It matters more than you might think. Sneha lived in Lower Manhattan, but her story has reached people on every continent, and someone watching right now might be carrying a piece of this puzzle without even knowing it. So tell me, where are you tonight? To understand what was lost on the evening of September 10th, 2001, you have to start in a coastal province in southern India, more than 7,000 miles from where she would eventually disappear. Sneha Anne Philip was born on October 7, 1969, in the state of Kerala, India. According to records compiled by the Charlie Project and the 9/11 Living Memorial Archives, her parents, Ansu and Philip Coquille Philip, were physicians themselves. The family immigrated to the United States when Sneha was very young, eventually settling in Dutchess County in southern New York State. Her mother would later take a position as a computer programmer at Dutchess Community College, the same school that would one day place a small memorial on its grounds in her daughter's name. Sneha was the second of 3 children. She had an older brother, Ashwin, and another brother, John. The household was the kind of immigrant household where ambition was not negotiable, and where medicine was not just a career path but a family inheritance. Sneha followed it. She attended Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, graduating in 1991 with a bachelor's degree. She then enrolled at the Chicago Medical School, an institution that has since been absorbed into Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science, where she earned her Doctor of Medicine. By the late 1990s, she had returned to New York to begin her residency, internal medicine, long hours, hospital wards, patient rounds. The kind of grinding apprenticeship that breaks doctors before it makes them. It was during this period that she met Ronald Lieberman. He was also a physician, also a resident, training in emergency medicine at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx. They married in May of 2000 in Dutchess County, where Sneha had grown up. Shortly afterward, the newlyweds moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Battery Park City, on the southwestern tip of Manhattan, less than half a mile from the Twin Towers. They could see the towers from the street outside their front door. They walked past them on the way to the subway. They were 2 physicians starting a life together in the heart of the city, in the shadow of 2 of the most famous buildings on earth. Sneha was, by every account that reached her family and friends, a working physician. She was, at the time of her disappearance, in her 3rd year of residency at St. Vincent's Hospital in Staten Island, an internal medicine post she had taken after leaving an earlier internship at Cabrini Medical Center in Manhattan. Her mother described her in an interview with New York Magazine years after her disappearance as kind, compassionate, beautiful inside, beautiful outside. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, 115 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. She wore contact lenses. She had pierced ears. Yahoo! That is the public record of who Sneha Anne Philip was. The rest, the parts that would eventually be argued over in courtrooms and headlines, would not surface until after she was already gone. Now that you know who Sneha was, not just a name in a missing persons file, but a young woman who came halfway around the world to become a doctor, who married another doctor, who started a life 4 blocks from where the world would change forever, I want you to think for a moment. Does she remind you of anyone? A friend? A cousin? A classmate? A colleague? Tell me about that person in the comments. Keeping Sneha human is how we keep her case from disappearing twice. Monday, September 10th, 2001, was a day off for Sneha. She was not scheduled at the hospital. According to the timeline reconstructed by her husband, by investigators, and by reporting from New York Magazine, the morning began with breakfast. Sneha and Ron walked a few blocks from their Battery Park City apartment and ate together at around 10 o'clock in the morning. They parted ways at approximately 11:30. He went to work. She went home. What she did between then and mid-afternoon is documented largely through her own digital footprint and the recollections of one person, her mother. Sneha logged onto her computer and signed into an instant messaging service. For roughly 2 hours, she chatted with Ansu, who was at her job at Dutchess Community College. She talked about ordinary things. She had repotted some orchids in the apartment. She had plans for the week. A cousin was coming to dinner 2 nights later, and she was going to clean up before then. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she wanted to visit Windows on the World, the celebrated restaurant on the 107th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. A friend of hers was getting married there the following spring, and she wanted to see the venue before then. That detail, the casual mention of the restaurant on top of the building that would, in less than 24 hours, no longer exist, is one of the most haunting fragments in the entire case file. It also became, years later, one of the central arguments her family used to suggest she had been on her way toward the towers when the plane struck. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Sneha signed off the chat with her mother. According to records cited by the Charlie Project, she left the apartment at 5:15 p.m., dropped clothes at a neighborhood dry cleaner, and walked to the Century 21 department store. Century 21 sat directly across the street from the World Trade Center complex. It was, in 2001, one of the most popular discount designer stores in the city. There, using the American Express card she shared with her husband, Sneha, bought a dress, lingerie, pantyhose, and a set of bed linens. She moved to an annex of the same store and purchased 3 pairs of shoes. Each transaction was recorded. Each item appeared on the credit card statement. And then, at exactly 7:18 p.m., on the evening of September 10, 2001, the security camera at Century 21 recorded her one last time. She was carrying 2 large shopping bags. She walked out of frame. And from that moment forward, no verified eyewitness, no security camera, no documentary record places Sneha Anne Philip anywhere on Earth. Not the next morning, not the next week, not the next month, not the next quarter century. Ron Lieberman did not know any of this yet. He worked an evening shift at the hospital and went to bed late. According to investigators, his cell phone received a call from the couple's home phone at approximately 4 a.m. on the morning of September 11th. He has said, in interviews and court filings, that he does not remember the call. He may have rolled over and checked voicemail. He may not have. He woke for work at 6:30. The bedroom was empty. The apartment was empty. Sneha had not come home. He was not at first alarmed. According to multiple sources, including Fox News and New York Magazine, Sneha was a self-described night owl. She sometimes stayed out late, occasionally very late, occasionally returning home between 7 and 9 in the morning. She had family in Manhattan. Her brother lived in the West Village. She had cousins, she had friends. Ron assumed she was at one of their apartments. He left for work. He was at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx when the first plane hit the North Tower. He was at a hospital on the morning of September 11, 2001, when his entire field of medicine was about to be tested in a way none of them were prepared for. and his wife was not answering her phone. For most of that day, Ron believed what every family of every missing New Yorker believed in those first frantic hours. He believed she was alive somewhere, that the lines were down, that she would call. By that evening, he had used his medical credentials to push past the security perimeter that had locked down Lower Manhattan, and he had returned to the apartment in Battery Park City. He found the window had been left open. A fine gray dust had settled across every surface, dust that, in the days to come, would be revealed to be the pulverized remains of two of the tallest buildings in the world. There were small tracks in the dust where the couple's two kittens had walked across the furniture. There were no human footprints. The shopping bags from Century 21 were not in the apartment. Sneha's passport was on a shelf. Her other credit cards, except for the American Express she had used the night before, were where she had left them. She was simply gone. Sneha Anne Philip was reported missing, along with thousands of other people, in the chaos that followed September 11th. Her family printed flyers. They taped them to phone booths near Ground Zero. They taped them to lampposts and building facades and inside the windows of bodegas. They were, for weeks, indistinguishable from the thousands of other flyers that lined Lower Manhattan. Faces of fathers, mothers, secretaries, firefighters, traders, busboys, all looking out from beneath the same handwritten word, missing. But Sneha's case was different in one critical, terrible way. She was the only person on those flyers whose disappearance had not been triggered by the attacks themselves. She had vanished the night before. In the days after September 11th, Sneha's brother spoke to the press. He told reporters his sister had last been heard from running into the burning towers to help victims as a doctor. The story was widely repeated. It fit. She lived 4 blocks away. She was a physician. The world wanted heroes. He admitted much later that the story had not been true. He had said it because he was desperate to keep his sister's name in the news, at a time when missing persons stories were being printed by the thousand. He told Charlie Project researchers and other reporters in subsequent years that he had simply been trying to get her face on television. The lie complicated everything that came after. The NYPD, when they finally turned their attention to the case in the weeks that followed, was already skeptical. Detectives initially treated Sneha's disappearance as a likely 9/11 fatality and did not investigate aggressively. Frustrated, Ron Lieberman hired a private investigator named Ken Gallant. Gallant pulled the security footage from the lobby of their apartment building, and there, at 8:43 a.m., on the morning of September 11th, 3 minutes before the first plane struck the North Tower, the camera captured a figure entering the building. A woman. She walked in, stood near the elevator, waited for several minutes, and then turned around and walked out again. The image was poor. The lobby was flooded with backlight from the morning sun. The figure appeared in silhouette only, but Gallant noted that the woman's hair and dress were consistent with the Century 21 footage from the night before. He believed it was Sneha. There was no proof. There never would be. But the timing of that lobby image, 3 minutes before impact, in the precise window during which Sneha had typically returned home from a long night out, became the cornerstone of the case her family would eventually take to court. While the private investigator was working, the New York Police Department finally opened its own file. And what they found, when they began turning over the rocks of Sneha's life, was a portrait that contradicted, sometimes radically, the one her family was offering the press. According to police reports later cited by the New York Times, the New York Daily News, New York Magazine, and the appellate court itself, Sneha had been struggling. Her contract at Cabrini Medical Center had not been renewed because of what records described as alcohol-related issues and tardiness. At St. Vincent's, she had reportedly been suspended for failing to attend court-ordered meetings with a substance abuse counselor. There were court records. There were marital problems. There was a criminal charge, not for substance use, but for filing a false complaint. Sneha had accused a male colleague of grabbing her inappropriately. Authorities did not believe her account, and when she refused to recant the complaint, they had charged her with making it falsely. She had appeared in court over that charge on the very morning of September 10th, hours before the chat with her mother, hours before the trip to Century 21, hours before she walked out of frame and out of every record of the world. There were other allegations in the police report. Allegations of frequenting bars, of relationships outside the marriage, of behavior her family fiercely and publicly disputed. These details are to this day contested. Justice David Sachs of the New York State Appellate Division would eventually describe much of the police report as hearsay that had not been properly introduced or tested in the original hearing. An academic, what is certain is that two opposing portraits of Sneha emerged in the months and years following her disappearance. One was offered by police, drawn from court records, employment files, and informant statements. The other was offered by her husband, her parents, her brothers, and her cousins. Ron told New York Magazine in 2006, in language that became one of the defining quotes of the case, "Because we don't live a conservative lifestyle doesn't mean that anything abnormal is going on." He went on to argue that even if every allegation were true, none of them explained how a 31-year-old woman walked out of a department store at 7:18 on a Monday evening and never reappeared anywhere. All that's interesting. There was one other piece of evidence that no one could explain. A clerk at the Century 21 store, after seeing the missing flyers, contacted the family. She said she remembered Sneha well. Sneha had been a frequent customer, and on the evening of September 10th, the clerk recalled, Sneha had not been alone. She had been accompanied, the clerk said, by another young woman, possibly of South Asian descent. Sneha had introduced her as a friend. Ron Lieberman, after Sneha's disappearance, sat through 3 weeks of Century 21 surveillance footage trying to find this woman. He found Sneha. He saw her browsing the coat department. He saw her at the registers. But he never saw the second woman, and the second woman, whoever she was, never came forward, not in 2001, not in 2008, not in 2025. Whatever she knew, she took with her. Investigators had a department store clerk's eyewitness account, lobby footage of a silhouette at 8:43 a.m. on the morning of the attacks, and a phone call from inside an empty apartment at 4 o'clock in the morning. They had a missing physician who had vanished into a city that was about to lose nearly 3,000 people in 90 minutes. So I want to ask you, what's your read on this? Did Sneha make it back to the towers? Did she meet someone in those last hours who didn't want to be found? Or is the answer something else entirely? Drop your theory in the comments. For the family of Sneha Anne Philip, the years that followed the attacks were a different kind of grief from anything most 9/11 families experienced. They were grieving, like every other family. But they were also fighting to be allowed to grieve in the way they believed their daughter deserved. In 2003, after the police investigation had concluded without resolution, Ron Lieberman filed a petition in New York County Surrogate's Court, asking that his wife be formally declared a victim of the September 11th attacks. New York state law required for such a declaration what is called clear and convincing evidence. Evidence that the person had been exposed to a specific lethal peril. Ron's argument was that Sneha's profession, her location, and the timing of the lobby footage all pointed in one direction. The federal September 11th Victim Compensation Fund had already closed its books in 2003, so the petition was not, fundamentally, about money. It was about a name on a list. It was about a place at a memorial. It was about the difference between a woman who had vanished and a woman who had died. In 2004, the surrogate court ruled against him. The judge cited the police report, citing what was described as Sneha's personal and professional problems, and concluded that there was insufficient evidence to prove she had been at or near the World Trade Center on the morning of the attacks. Her name was removed from the official list of 9/11 victims maintained by the New York City Medical Examiner's Office. In November of 2005, a Manhattan judge ruled on the question of when exactly Sneha had died. Under New York state law, after 3 years of unexplained absence, a person can be declared legally dead, the date of death set as the 3rd anniversary of their disappearance. The judge ruled that Sneha Anne Philip had legally died on September 10, 2004, 3 years to the day after she walked out of Century 21, not September 11th. The day before, it was a procedural decision, but for the family it landed like a verdict. Sneha had been declared dead on the wrong day, for the wrong reason, against everything they believed. In June of 2006, Judge Renee Roth ruled again that the evidence did not support a finding that Sneha had died in the September 11th attacks. The ruling was a refinement of the earlier one, but the conclusion was the same. Officially, in the eyes of the state of New York, Sneha Anne Philip had vanished, but she had not died on 9/11. For her mother, the ruling was unbearable in a way that defied legal logic. Ansu Philip told New York Magazine in a statement that has been quoted in nearly every retrospective on the case that it was easier to believe her daughter had died at the World Trade Center than to believe someone had killed her. The hardest part of an unsolved disappearance is not the absence. It is the open door, the constant, low-grade question of whether the person you loved suffered, whether they were afraid, whether they died alone, in a place you would never know to look for them. For 7 years, Sneha's family waited for a court, any court, to acknowledge what they believed in their bones to be true. 7 years of legal filings, depositions, and front-page articles dissecting their daughter's private life. If you have ever waited like that, for justice, for an answer, for someone in a position of authority to finally say the thing you needed them to say, I want to hear about it. That kind of patience is its own form of love. Tell me your story in the comments. By the end of 2007, the family had filed an appeal. Ron Lieberman, his attorney, and the family's legal team prepared to argue before the appellate division of the New York State Supreme Court. They had no new evidence. They had only the same record that had been weighed and reweighed by every court before. The lobby footage, the 4 a.m. phone call, the proximity of the apartment to the towers, the chat with her mother about windows on the world, the fact that Sneha was a doctor who, by every account from people who knew her, would not have walked away from people in need. Before I tell you what the court decided, I want you to take a moment and think about what you would have ruled. You're a judge. You have a missing physician who vanished from her own neighborhood 12 hours before the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. You have no body. You have no proof of presence. You have a fragment of footage, a phone call no one remembers, and a husband who refuses to give up. What do you do? Drop your verdict in the comments before you keep watching. On February 1, 2008, in a 4-1 decision, the New York State Appellate Division ruled in favor of Sneha Anne Philip's family. Justice David Sachs, writing for the majority, concluded that the simplest explanation was the most likely. He wrote that the evidence shows it to be highly probable that she died that morning and at that site, and that any other conclusion required, in his words, the rankest speculation. Yahoo! Sachs addressed the police report directly. He found that the most damaging allegations against Sneha, the substance abuse, the bar visits, the implication that she had been killed by a stranger she had met the night before, were unsupported by any actual evidence introduced at the original hearing. He described those claims as unreliable hearsay. He acknowledged plainly that there was no direct proof Sneha had ever been at the World Trade Center on the morning of the attack. But the law, he wrote, did not require certainty. It required only that the most reasonable interpretation of the available evidence point toward exposure to lethal peril. And in this case, the most reasonable interpretation was that a young physician, 4 blocks from the towers, in possession of medical training, with surveillance footage, placing a figure consistent with her in her own apartment lobby 3 minutes before impact, had walked toward the disaster and not away from it. She was officially declared the 2,751st victim of the collapse of the World Trade Center. In July of 2008, the city of New York formally notified the family that Sneha's name had been added to the official list of victims. It would later be inscribed at the National September 11 Memorial in Lower Manhattan on a panel along the South Pool, alongside the names of those who died inside the building she may or may not have entered. The family had waited almost 7 years for that inscription. They got it without ever knowing whether it was true. There would be no funeral with a body. There never could be. The family eventually buried an urn containing ashes recovered from Ground Zero in a cemetery near their home in upstate New York. It was a symbolic gesture. The ashes were not, and could not be, identified as belonging to Sneha. They simply represented the place she may have died. In Kerala, the province where she had been born, 2 memorial funds were established in her name. The Sneha Philip Memorial Fund, founded by her family, pays for medical care for indigent patients at a clinic outside the city of Aluva. The Marthoma Doctors Association launched a separate fund. In Dutchess County, where she had grown up, a memorial was placed at the community college where her mother worked. The case has never been closed in any meaningful sense. The 2008 ruling was a legal finding, not a forensic one. It established a presumption of death at the World Trade Center for purposes of state law, memorialization, and family closure. It did not identify her remains. It did not explain where she spent the night of September 10th. It did not produce the woman from the Century 21 store or explain who placed the 4 a.m. phone call from her own apartment or prove that the silhouette in the lobby footage was Sneha and not someone else. In 2021, on the 20th anniversary of the attacks, the New York City Medical Examiner's Office announced it had been approved to use new generations of DNA technology to test the bone fragments, many no larger than a fingernail, recovered from Ground Zero that had never been identified. More than 1,100 9/11 victims still have no remains returned to their families. Sneha is one of them. As of this recording, no fragment has been positively matched to her. There is a version of this story in which a private investigator finds the second woman from Century 21. There is a version in which DNA technology, 25 years after the fact, returns a single shard of bone to her family. There is a version in which the shoe clerk's memory was wrong and the woman in the lobby was someone else entirely, and Sneha Anne Philip is sitting somewhere on this earth, 24 years after, walking out of a department store, having simply chosen not to come back. Each of those versions has been argued, in print, in court, and in the comments sections of retrospectives like this one. None of them has ever been proven. What is true is this. A 31-year-old physician born in Kerala, raised in upstate New York, trained at Johns Hopkins and the Chicago Medical School, married less than 18 months, walked into a department store on Monday, September 10, 2001, and walked out of recorded human history at exactly 7:18 p.m. The next morning, the world she had stepped out of stopped existing. Whether she died inside that world or just before it ended may never be answered. Her mother described her, more than 2 decades ago, in 4 words that still carry across every retelling of this case: kind, compassionate, beautiful inside, beautiful outside. Whatever else may be argued about Sneha Anne Philip, and there is much, on both sides, the people who knew her best have never wavered from those 4 words. They are in the end the only piece of testimony that has remained constant from the day she vanished to today. If you are watching this and you have any information about the disappearance of Dr. Sneha Anne Philip, about the unidentified woman seen with her at Century 21 on the evening of September 10, 2001, about her movements that night, about anything that might add a single verified detail to a record that is still incomplete, the New York City Police Department continues to maintain her file. Information regarding unidentified remains from the World Trade Center site can be directed to the Office of Chief Medical Examiner of the City of New York. Sneha Anne Philip's name is engraved on the National September 11 Memorial. She is officially the 2,751st victim of the attacks. But the question of what truly happened to her, in the hours between the camera at Century 21 and the planes that hit the towers, remains one of the most haunting open questions in the long shadow of that morning. If this story moved you, if you want to keep cases like Sneha's from disappearing into the static, please subscribe to Echo of Evidence. Every subscription, every comment, every share keeps these stories alive when the headlines have moved on. And it tells the families of the missing that someone, somewhere, is still listening. Every case deserves an answer. Every family deserves the truth.